to Turtle Talks.
Today we're going to talk about this paper. This paper is called Effects of Amphetamine on Prosocial Ultrasonic Communication in Juvenile Rats and Implications for Ammonia Models. And we have done some of the research like we know that amphetamine has like some effect on some other animals, but we have no idea like how it affects the juvenile rats.
Yeah, previous experiments are focused on standards, so how rats emit the sounds. But in this experiment, the researchers were focused on how the rats receive the sound effect.
What's interesting is, so amphetamine is a stimulant, which is also taken recreationally, but they're looking at its medicinal purposes, and they were looking specifically at the juvenile rat, which is important because I feel like it's often not studied, and by looking at that, we could see the amphetamine's reaction to like juvenile play behavior. In this study, amphetamine was used as a model for mania. So they found in previous research that this amphetamine response is very similar to that seen in a patient with mania. And so it's been used as a treatment for things like ADHD and Parkinson's.
So, for the first result, the scientists, they study how the amphetamine affects the locomotor activity of the juvenile rats, and also they test how they produce this appetite 50 USV 60 kilohertz USV sounds.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about more about the method?
Yeah, so the distance traveled and then apparative 50 kilohertz UCV were measured in open field. And then distance travel were measured online, and then infrared beam, and that was set above the arena, and the 50 kilohertz UCB were measured by ultrasonic microphone. And then the arena was also covered with the bedding in order to make the apparative sounds better. And the experiment was occurred 3 days. The day 1 was baseline, and day 2 was saline, and then day 3 was treatment. And the treatment was administered immediately before the testing.
And also, if we look at the data, if we look at the graph, how the scientific, how they study how long the juvenile rat travel, and also comparative to the treatment, we can find out there are no significant influence for amphetamine. No, there is no significant influence for the saline and the baseline group. They don't have any effects on the juvenile rats and their locomotor activity. But if you look at the amphetamine group, it's kind of inverted U-shaped graph. It's increasing from the very low dose to a kind of high dose, but it goes down when the dose is extremely high.
It's interesting that they decided to do the baseline and the saline, since they are both controls, and I guess they were trying to see if there's any difference between giving a placebo type effect versus nothing. But there really was no difference.
Yeah, I feel it's kind of interesting, the reason we cannot use the placebo effect is we cannot tell juvenile rats this is something we are going to insert, this is something we are going to treat you. So that might be...
Yeah, it's to make sure there's not some effect that's just caused by the fact that they're getting something.
Yeah, and as Wilson mentioned, the inverse effect of amphetamine was very interesting, because I was expecting as higher dose, more locomotor activity, but when we administered 5 milligram amphetamine to the rats, the locomotor activity went down. So I wonder why.
It's also interesting because they argue that this can be used for future research for studies of mania, and so it's interesting to see, because that's a fairly well-respected model for mania, and it has high face validity. But I wonder what doses are considered a manic equivalent, because there was such a clear distinction between like the 2.5 milligrams per kilograms dose was like way above all the other ones, and then once you got to 5 milligrams per kilograms of body weight, it way diminished. And so when they're saying that it's a model, was this to determine like the peak manic state? And it talked a lot about how it increased goal-driven behavior and impulsivity. And so it's intriguing to see how that relates to mania in terms of a mental illness and what that might mean for treatment. Do you guys have any ideas?
Yeah, maybe in order to know the best treatment for mania, we could use the result of inverse effect. So when the 5 milligram it went down, so maybe before that was the best. And then consider that we can think about the another medicine to treat the mania. And
yeah, it's also interesting. I was thinking about how they had bedding down in the open field, and so all they mention in the results section is just that the distance overall travel was increased. And so I wonder if the bedding made it so that, I know they did the bedding for the sound measures, but I wonder if that played at all a part in like their stress levels in the open field itself, because it wasn't truly an open field, it was like more like a den.
Yeah, for me it was not like, for me it's a good assessment like to measure the activity, like the hyperactivity, like how much they travel. But like for me, I feel like it's not a complete assessment like for the how the amphetamine can actually affect the locomotor activity. Because like for the locomotor activity, we have like a lot of dimensions. Like for the distance in travel, it's just like one of them. And also we don't really know like what the pattern like the juvenile rats are moving. Like are they moving all the way? Like are they just like go through the parameter, or like they just go through the middle or go through the center all the time? So we don't know about that.
When if the rods were moving around the corner, we can say they're also stressed. But if they were just going to the middle, they're very excited, and then they're not stressful. So it's another way to measure how rats move.
It kind of brings up the idea of comorbidity of these different like mental states, because I was thinking along those lines that like in addition to possibly playing an element of how stressed or unstressed they are, hyperactivity to me makes me think of attention deficit disorders like ADHD, and yet they're saying this is a model for mania, and so I wonder how this like increased locomotor activity might play a part in either of those mental illnesses, or if there's some like it's hard with animal models, like how do you define what a manic rat is, because we have very clear like psychological systems and like testing to determine like if someone has major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety, where in a rat it's harder to know like what is actually going on in terms of psychology. So I wonder how those might interact.
And also like for the application, I feel like the reason we do all of the research is like one day we can apply this stuff to the human. Like as we talk about like for the shape, like for the results we can see the U, like the inverted U-shaped graph, but like we know that the extremely high dose may affect, like may damage the function, like the normal function of the brain or the body. So like if one day like we apply this to the human, does it have the same damage to the human, and how we can cure those side effects, like if by mistakenly we take like more dose than what we were expected to take, something like that. So that might be an issue.
Yeah. So by using the result, we can think about how we can reduce those manic effects by amphetamine. And also, as Wilson said, we can think about how we could relate that to human. And in school, like juvenile, like ADHD, and kind of hyperactive in school or social issue. And then if they're realized by adults that they're having mental disorder, they could end up committing a crime and going to jail, and that's a very sad, but it's actually happening. So we could think about how we can use this result to schools.
For the second part, the scientists designed the study to study how the amphetamine affects the social exploratory activity for the juvenile rats. So they play two kind of background music. The first one is 50 kilohertz, the USB, and the other is white noise. It's complete white noise. And the scientists find out that for the 50 kilohertz USB, they have the same inverted U-shaped manner, because it's like if you have a small dose, it has increasing effect if you increase the dose. But if the dose is extremely high, it just decreases, it's all damaged. But for the white noise, they found out that the white noise they actually inhibits the behavior. So do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. The paradigm used to measure this one was radio maze playback paradigm, and then the maze has 8 different arms, and then at the end of the one arm, the speaker was the noises were put it, and another visual control, another speaker looking stuff was put it on the opposite side of the arm, and then the behavior was monitored, and then the measurement was conducted to how much the rods entered the arms, and then the entry of this distal and then proximal.
Yeah, it was interesting because this study focuses on the wanting behavior versus most amphetamine psychostimulant studies that have been done have focused on liking. So they found that it potentiated that approach response for the 50 kilohertz USB, which indicated that they were wanting to approach what was insinuating another rat being there with the sound, versus they were very adverse to the white noise. They're no, get away from that, and kind of ran away. And so it's interesting. They were saying it models in humans the idea that under amphetamine, oftentimes people become very talkative and very aware of people's facial expressions and emotions. And so that idea of increasing approach or wanting, they kind of titled this section social exploratory behavior.
Yeah, and then even they put the speaker as the speaker looking thing as the visual control, but putting another rods, and then their emission of 50 kilohertz UCB will be different, because the rods will be hearing actual sounds from the rods. So even the rods was hearing the sound through the speaker, but also having visual stimuli. By putting another rods will be different.
Yeah, I think this model is pretty good because it builds a relationship, it builds a way to how to find the actual social exploratory behavior with some sort of the control, we play different kinds of sound and it represents different of creatures, different kinds of animals appear in that situation. But I feel it's not that complete, because if we only play the sound, I feel it's not the real, the actual social behavior. Instead, I'm kind of I want to propose we can have more actual rats, like Moeka said, we can have some visual aid in that situation, and also we can because we know like the rats they use smell to determine like their surroundings, so probably the smell may have like some another effect, like if there's another rat, well the treated rat is super nervous about everything, and also like for the white noise, like why is white noise like inhibited those? So that's also the question.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read a paper a few months ago about a zebrafish study where they were trying to compare whether a simulated visual of a zebrafish affected the fish inside the tank the same way as seeing an actual fish on the other side of the glass. And I wonder if there's been some comparable research done for rats of how like we're modeling this other social being there with this sound, but like you were saying, I wonder if the smell or the visual stimuli would affect their behavior at all. And that wasn't really mentioned in the article, so I think it'd be important to tell, like if you're going to make an assumption about like an animal's social behavior, you need to make sure that that paradigm is accurately showing what they would socially be doing.
Yeah, even I was wondering that what is the difference between social locomotor activity and social exploratory activity, and then if even by using open field, if we could measure how they moved in the field, it can also say social exploratory activity.
Yeah, I wonder how like social exploratory in terms of space, like I wonder if they were specifically trying to get at the like exploratory behavior with another rat versus just exploring in general.
Yeah, like in terms of the social exploratory behavior, like for this article, I feel like it makes more sense like if you say like what is the effect for amphetamine, like if there has another rat, or because like in the experiment we can only see like there's only one source of the sound, so probably like what about like we have like a multiple source of the sound, like we put the speaker all over the maze, and what is the other effect, like will they be super nervous, like will the rats be like super attracted by the sound or something?
At the same time, that gets hard to control. So, like, I can understand why the scientists didn't do that, because it's really a nice study to just have it be proximal and distal versus all the other options.
Yeah.
Trivia time. Did you know sea turtles love jellyfish? And then they sometimes think the plastic in the ocean is the jellyfish, and then they eat it and then they die. Save the turtle. Also with radio maze, the sound producing from rats was measured by a microphone, and this time there are two variables, which is white noise and 50 kilohertz USB and amphetamine dose.
Yes, for the result at this part, we found out that for the under the 50 kilohertz USB production, the sound is like they were produced really well. Like the rats actually produced 22 kilohertz USB, and also we found out like the amphetamine completely influenced, like they created inverted U-shaped relationship as well. Like with the increase of amphetamine, the sound production was helped, but like if you have a really extreme high large amount of amphetamine, the sound production system was kind of inhibited. But under the white noise, the white noise just inhibited the sound production completely. Like under the white noise, the ref was like, okay, I'm good, I'm not producing anything. Yeah.
It was interesting because then they started relating this to the dopamine system and the nucleus accumbens, and there's been previous studies showing how in the sender, so this was in our case just a speaker, so obviously not releasing any dopamine there, but they found that in that sender there was this it was very critically dependent on this release of dopamine based on when it was making that sound, or whether it was contributing to the social situation. But in this study they found that that was also true in the receiver. So they found that responding to that sender's sound also release dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, which is sort of thought as like the reward center of the brain. And this, as you were saying, is dose dependently affected. So it's intriguing to think that like you get more reward with more amphetamine.
Yeah, it's also kind of interesting because like previously we studied like if you want to be happy, you need dopamine inside your body, and like we just study like how the drugs, how the amphetamine can affect the dopamine release. But like in this scenario, we designed the experiment like we know that you heard something, the sound can actually stimulate the release of dopamine, like they can kind of help. And also like for the white noise, like we really know that there's some kind of sound they can really actually inhibit the sound production. So it's kind of interesting. It also can be related to the real like scenario, like real social scenario that if you are really engaged in one of the social situation, you are receive like lots of like sound similar to you, and you will be like you will find yourself really satisfying like psychology, whatever. Yeah, and that's also a really interesting point. Like it can be also for the future use. Like if you really heard something, you really feel pleasant. It's a good thing for you.
Yeah, and also the result reminded me some certain drugs need to take with therapists or need to get therapy while taking the drug. And then yeah, that's the result was while amphetamine was administered, the calling behavior was increased. So I think in human situation, by taking certain drugs while going to therapy will improve the patient's situation in a good way.
At the same time, though, I think we have to be careful about jumping to humans too much, because while it was cool that they looked at the receiver, this was one of the first studies that they've ever looked at the receiver's effects and their response. And so to jump and say that, oh, it's good to have therapy, like obviously there's been other research to show that therapy is good as well, so I'm not like saying that therapy is bad at all. I think it's wonderful, but to say that it's because of this system working, I think requires more research before we can truly like make that causal relationship. But I do think it's cool that they talked about it in this study, because it's not as talked about.
Yes, because like for the human, the real situation is way more complicated. Like we talk about like the placebo effect on the human can also plays a role. Like most people choose to believe, like they just believe their insight, like they just believe like what they believe in already. So like it's kind of hard for them to like change some sort of the ideas for the human.
Yeah, the placebo made me think when we were talking in class about that study with the blue pill and the red pill. And the red pill was amphetamine, which is what we're talking about, which is kind of fun. And it's interesting to think about that placebo effect when it pretty much unanimously everyone took the red pill of the amphetamine, and how that might play a part in like we were saying earlier, maybe that supports this idea of it's like rewarding or makes you feel good to have this amphetamine dose.
Yeah, maybe for the future experiment, we should have more factors like smell or placebo, so we will know how we can apply that result to the different situations.
Yeah, just like what we talked about for the last part, we like if we really want to create a real social scenario for this experiment, we need to like incorporate more factors like smells or visual aids to make this maze become a real society for the rats.
It's like this study was nice because it was so cleanly in a box, like sort of literally in the maze, with like one sound and looking for one response, and so it was very clear and concise. But life is often not super clear and concise, so that's always the struggle with science research, I think.
That's true. Trivia time. Do you know turtles inspired the ancient Roman military? During the battle, soldiers would get into turtles' shape. So the men formed the rows and held shields in front or above them to completely shelter the unit.
We
Are
Turtle Talks!
Thanks for watching. Bye.